Hi, everybody. How's it going? Thanks for coming out. I'm excited about today's talk. This is our September Art at Noon talk with Catoctin Forest Alliance artists Rachel Vogner, right? Boyner. Sorry. And Reagan Herndon. My name's Corey Fry, by the way. I'm the exhibitions manager here at the Belle Plaine Art Center. I'm going to invite Linda Sundergill up, and she's going to say a few things about the Artist in Residency program at the Catoctin Forest Alliance. And then I'll introduce our speakers.
Hi, I'm Linda Sundergill. I'm chairman of the Artist in Residence program at the Catoctin Forest Alliance, also known as CFA. I want to tell you just a little bit about the history of Artist in Residence before Corey introduces our current two air artists. Our organization is a friends group to Catoctin Mountain Park and Cunningham Falls State Park. Our mission is to preserve and promote the health of the Catoctin Mountain Forest for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. You might ask, what in the world does art have to do with the forest and the parks? Actually, art was partly responsible for the starting of the National Park System. As early as the 1800s, there were a group of artists from the Hudson River School that went to the west and captured the wilderness in their paintings, and they showed them to all the people back east to see what the new frontier was like. Artist George Catlin was thought to be the first person to suggest the idea of a government program that would protect parks and preserve nature's beauty for the future. The CFA AIR program started in 2010 through the efforts of Mel Poole, who was then the superintendent of Catoctin Mountain Park, and Elizabeth Promise, a local artist and environmentalist. They were anxious to preserve the connection between art and the parks and bring new and diverse voices and constituency to the parks. Our program serves both Catoctin Mountain Park and Cunningham Falls State Park. Since our program began, we've had 36 artists in residence. Each were selected by a jury of professional artists and writers. We have had painters, photographers, poets, writers, a videographer, a cast metal artist, a wool felter, a fabric artist, and a journaling artist. Each artist stays in the park for a 2 to 3 week residency. They produce art that is inspired by the Catoctin Mountains. At the end of the residency, each artist donates a piece of art to Catoctin Forest Alliance. And there's a slideshow on the table there that shows all of the artwork that's been donated, so have a look if you would like. There are also some brochures there and business cards if you'd like to know more about CFA. I thank you all for coming, and now Corey will introduce our artists.
Okay, I'm going to read both bios so then I can get out of the way and they can both talk. Rachel Vogner, great, is a multimedia artist and educator from Cumberland, Maryland. Their practice is centered on themes of queer ecology, natural cycles, and healing, both personal and environmental. Using traditional media as well as raw natural material, they work to understand both trauma and joy through the lens of the natural world and ecological relationships. Rachel holds a BA in Art and Art History from McDaniel College and an interdisciplinary MFA from Hartford Art School. They've studied art and ecology through place-based experiences across the US, Mexico, and Ireland, and have exhibited in the US and Ireland. Rachel currently teaches art and design as an adjunct lecturer at McDaniel College. And Reagan Herndon is an artist currently living in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. After graduating from East Carolina University with a bachelor's degree in fine arts, where she concentrated in painting and drawing, she began working as a painting instructor and concept artist while exploring her own work. Using primary primarily acrylic paint and digital painting as her mediums. Her current work focuses on nature's wildlife and putting a twist on traditional landscapes and wildlife paintings. She aims to compel viewers to engage with the imagery through vibrant colors, lively textures, and surreal juxtapositions to evoke a sense of wonder and appreciation for nature's resources and ignite a passion for protecting our planet's ecosystems. Would you give Rachel a hand as she comes up to begin?
Hi everybody, thank you for coming today. I'm just going to set up a little timer so I don't go overboard here. So give me 1 second. But my name is Rachel Voinar. I am a mixed media artist, and like Corey said, my work is really focused on human-nature relationships and the ways in which those can help us learn about ourselves and the world around us. Before I get into my work, I want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. I grew up in Cumberland, Maryland, just down the road a little deeper into the mountains, and I was very lucky to grow up in such a beautiful place. There's so much natural beauty in that part of the world. Beautiful mountains, rivers, lakes, valleys, and I have been very connected to nature since I was a kid. I've always wanted to be outside, have always loved being outdoors, and I've also always called myself an artist. I've been drawing since I could hold a crayon, and I wanted to throw this little photo in here as proof. And I think it's pretty funny that anybody who's stumbled upon my campsite who's come out to see me while I've been in residence at Cunningham Falls has seen me looking pretty much like this, a little disheveled outside in my pajamas, parading around some silly art. So that's me, that's who I am. Like I said, I've been drawing since I was really little, and have always loved drawing and painting. Have had a passion for art since the early days. So I decided to go to school for it. I got my bachelor's from McDaniel College, where I now teach. But when I went to school there, I started to kind of depart from drawing and painting and got into some less traditional art media. And so I've got a couple pieces here that were from my undergraduate show, my thesis show, and you can see that I started experimenting with using found natural materials to create sculpture. And so I was working with things like insects and wood and mushroom mycelium, and starting to play with material as a way to connect with the natural world. So I'm not going to get too far into that, but beyond my undergraduate degree, I did my master's with University of Hartford's NOMAD program, and that was a really special program because it provided us with a place-based experience. Each semester we did a residency in a different place somewhere across the US and Mexico, and in each place we worked with artists who, in their home studios, who were working with the land. So I learned natural dye techniques in Oaxaca, I learned to forage wild clay in New Mexico and to pit fire it. I learned about permaculture and how to shape land to help the full ecosystem up in the Catskills. And doing this program really opened up the ways in which artists can connect with the land around them. And that has been such an important thing in all of my work from day one. And so as I was going through this program, learning to develop my relationship with my ecosystems, with the land, I started having to take a lot of space for environmental grief. We're living in a time of environmental crisis. We've been in this kind of state for quite some time now. Climate change is happening. There's a lot of ecosystems that are declining in health. And so there's a lot of grief to deal with when you are working intimately with your land and knowing the world around you. And so that was what my thesis show was about. I was working with processing that ecological grief, and I I did so by kind of intertwining traditional memorialization processes of creating death masks with the natural process of decomposition aided by fungi. So the sculptures that I did for this show were all made from entirely biodegradable natural materials cast in mushroom mycelium, and then they fruited in the gallery, rotted in the gallery, and there was kind of like this beautiful and kind of horrific process of life and death and decay and regrowth happening in the gallery. And it was really important to me that all of my work was biodegradable, that my work would decompose within a human lifespan or shorter. I was really committed to lessening my impact on the environment that way and kind of decentering the human to make space for other kinds of life. But I was doing this work in 2019, 2020, and I'm doing this work that's dealing a lot with grief and with death. And when the pandemic started in 2020, it became very hard to hold this kind of work and to keep working with that. And so after I finished my degree, I kind of pivoted in my work, and I just got back into drawing for the first time in a really long time. And I got interested in the geometry of natural forms, of things like flowers and mushrooms and lichen, the way that they kind of unfurl and create this just pure beauty in the world. And I really fixated on that and did a series of drawings just in pastel to kind of celebrate that. And this was around the time where I was starting to come out of the closet as queer and non-binary. And so as I was exploring these forms, this kind of unfurling forms in nature, I was experiencing this kind of opening up of myself, discovering my true self, and accepting it and finding the joy in it. So this is the first point in my work where I really started putting myself into it, and that has kind of stayed along since then. And I've continued to work with that. So growing up queer and closeted in Appalachia, there's a lot of grief that comes with the knowledge that you've lived a lot of your life not genuinely. There's a lot of joy when you can come out and be yourself. And I have been doing a lot of processing of that joy and that grief, that trauma. And this one piece was related to that. I created this piece in 2021 when the 17-year cicadas came back in Maryland. And for those of you who might not know about the phenomenon of this, these cicadas are basically dormant underground for 17 years at a time. And then the year rolls around and every single one of them comes out of the ground. They leave holes in the ground and they're just cicadas everywhere, covering the streets. They're so loud, and it's kind of this momentous thing. And the first time this happened, first time I saw this in my life, I was just a little kid, and I can remember my brother running around the yard and picking them up and stuffing them into his pockets and trying to feed them to the dogs. And I was just kind of horrified by it back then. And when they came back, and I just got to see them and know them as an adult, I was kind of just, I fell in love with the cicadas. I just thought that they were this beautiful thing, just emerging from the ground and learning how to sing and how to fly all at once. But as I was, spending time seeing them, watching them, I also noticed that the sidewalks and the streets were littered with just parts and pieces of them from the birds that had been eating them and things like that. And I stumbled across one cicada that had just come out of its shell. It was still soft and pale, it hadn't hardened yet, and it was in such a vulnerable state. And I really connected with that little creature and equated that vulnerability to the vulnerability of coming out of the closet in a hostile environment. I had, seen so many examples of queer friends and family members going to the birds, right? being kicked out of their homes or sent to conversion therapy, or like their parents would never look at them the same way again. And that's such a scary thing, such a traumatic thing. And I was very lucky that my family is so supportive of me, but I had so much fear to deal with. And this piece was really about that fear, that vulnerability, and overcoming that fear. So I'm starting to use these kind of ecological anecdotes as tools for processing everything that's going on within me. And that's kind of what my work has morphed into, just combining ecological knowledge and learning from the natural world to understand myself. And so I kept working with these kinds of things, delving into the field of queer ecology, which is kind of the intersection of queer theory and queer experience with the field of ecology. And these two pieces are kind of grim, but they are pieces about the suppression of biodiversity because of human influence. And I was kind of equating that to my suppression of myself due to outside influence. And so 2 pieces here, both dead birds, both upside down. The piece on the left is I made when I saw an exhibition on early days of ornithology, and I delved into the history of naturalism a bit. And naturalism is this amazing field that helps us connect with the world, and it's the reason for our national parks, our state parks, and it's such a wonderful thing. But it has some kind of grim origins, and especially within ornithology, that so-called naturalists and ornithologists would just shoot birds to identify them and collect them, and they stuff them and tie them up and tuck them into drawers as study skins. And so I saw this study skin of a cormorant in this museum exhibit. I was just struck by it. I was found it so harrowing the way that its feet and its bill were bound with thread. And I wanted to create a piece about that that really captured the grisly history of it. So I included all of the insides that were taken out and replaced with cotton. And the piece on the right here is another instance of biodiversity being threatened. And in this case, it has to do with invasive species. So the bird in the middle is a violet green swallow, and the birds around the outside are European house sparrows. And those house sparrows are an invasive species. You've probably seen them all around, and they're very aggressive and have a very detrimental effect on other native bird species. They are known to evict other birds from their nests, and they do so by attacking those birds and killing them, which I thought was so grim. I found this out by one day walking outside and seeing back in the parking lot behind my apartment, there were just like 4 or 5 dead swallows littered across the parking lot, and I thought that was so sad and so harrowing and just upsetting to see that the native species here were being threatened and going into decline because of invasive species. And the invasive species it's not their fault, it's their nature, but there's an imbalance happening, and that's something that I'm really interested in. There's a lot of imbalance when it comes to our ecosystems, it comes to the state of the environment, but also when it comes to our world. There are a lot of ideologies that really are super aggressive and want to squash others, and so I'm kind of thinking about equating those in this piece. So you'll notice in those past few slides, I've been working with traditional media again, right? I've been working with colored pencils and oils, had really gotten into drawing and painting. And I started to kind of miss my days of working with natural materials, making sculptures out of bugs. And so I started trying to think about how I can combine that, how I can bring that part of my work back into my practice. And I started doing so with botanical pigments. So I started experimenting with making my own plant inks, and that's what I did in the piece on the left. And the piece on the right here, I worked with some kind of interesting processes. I started on a cyanotype, which is a photographic process. And those of you who might be familiar with cyanotypes know that they are blue or cyan. But if you put them into a bath of plants, some sort of botanicals that has tannins in it, it will shift the colors back to browns and greens, and you'll get kind of like these interesting natural tones. So that's what I was working on here, trying to just experiment with how I can use the plants around me in my work and let that material add to the work instead of just relying entirely on traditional media. So I started to bring that back in, and the next step I took with that was to start making my own paper. So I started making these very kind of rudimentary painting surfaces out of plant material, going back to very like simple processes of paper making, starting with raw plant material, pounding it and putting it in water and pulling it with a screen. And I really have been enjoying working with these surfaces that are irregular. They're made from things directly in my environment, directly in my place, really connecting me to my local ecosystems in that sense. And I love the process of paper making, the process of taking something and kind of decomposing it myself, beating it with a hammer, or sticking it in a blender, and then recomposing it into something new and kind of giving it this new life. So I've been working on those as surfaces, again, working with the same themes of processing my life through ecological relationships and things like that. But I've really been enjoying working with that, and I have found it as a great way to connect with my place. And I want to continue doing that in my residency, continue really working with connecting to place. And I might do some paper making at my residency. I've brought things for it, and we're doing an invasive species pool in Cunningham Falls State Park tomorrow. I think there's one next week as well. And I'm hoping to kind of make some invasive species plant paper like these and do some painting on that. So I'm very excited about that. And I want to talk a little bit more about what I'm going to be getting up to during the residency. I am in the early days of it right now. I got in on Sunday, and so I'm camping in Cunningham Falls. I'm set up in a tent, and I've got my easels kind of all around my campsite. And I've just been using this week to really soak in the place. And I've been going on walks, hiking every day, going out, just taking my camera and taking lots of photos of the things that are inspiring me. And I've been really connecting with the trees on the residency. I've been so interested in tree bark. There are so many different tree species in the parks, and I'm interested in bark as this kind of built-in protection for a tree. And so I'm hoping to make a bark book as over the course of the residency. I like to do bookmaking, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I'm hoping to do one just themed around tree bark and what's underneath. And I think I might be tying in some things about invasive species as well. So in the park, we've got two invasive insects that are kind of a real problem. And one of those is the emerald ash borer, which kind of creates all of these lines in wood. If you may have seen that out in the woods. And the emerald ash borers are super detrimental to the health of forests. They target ash trees and kind of are really damaging to that species specifically. So they're kind of doing a real number on the biodiversity of the tree life. And so I'm interested in the relationship between that borer, the tree bark, what's going on underneath, and what's happening in the forest. And I've also been intrigued by the spotted lanternfly, and you guys have probably seen those around, even just on the sidewalks. I saw one in the parking garage today. They are kind of everywhere right now, and they've been kind of introduced over the past few years. They've really taken off, and they are super detrimental to lots of our local plant life. But I found an interesting thing this year. For the first time, I saw spotted lanternfly wings, just wings, in a pile in the woods. And what that means to me, what I think that means, is that the birds are discovering that they can eat them. And so it's like this instance of our ecosystem kind of correcting itself and coming back into balance. And I think that's such an amazing, hopeful thing. And I'm really hoping to make a piece about that over the course of the residency. So those are kind of some of my ideas, what I'm working with. And I will be kind of building upon those over the course of the residency. So far, I've just been kind of going out to the wood and sketching a lot, and I included some of my little art books here. I've got some sketchbooks and some art and poetry books that I've made. I really enjoy bookmaking as a process, and that's why I'm going to be doing a workshop in the park on next Saturday, where I'll be teaching how to make your own hand-bound nature book. So you can learn how to make a sketchbook or a journal. And this is such an important part of my process. I wanted to share it with everyone. And it's such a great way to connect with nature, connect with your surroundings, really learning how to observe what's around you. And having a book kind of gives you that very intentional space for observation. So I wanted to invite you all out to this next week. If you're in the area, please come by. You can register by emailing me, and there's some information about that here. But I think I'm going to call it at that and make sure we've got plenty of time for Reagan. Thank you all for listening. Super happy to be here. And I think if you have any questions, maybe find me at the end, or maybe we can have some space, but I'll let Reagan get on up here. Sound good? Okay, thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Reagan, and I'm an artist for here at the residency at Catoctin Mountain Park this year. So I work primarily with acrylic paint, and as I'll kind of mention later in the presentation too, I also work a lot with digital painting as well, and I'll get more into what that is. So this presentation is kind of be about me, my work, kind of my current kind of process, and kind of my artistic practice that I'm working on right now. So, but a little bit of background first. Again, my name is Rick. And then I did receive my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. But I also have a bachelor's degree in speech and hearing sciences as well. I teach painting classes as well as working as a freelance concept artist. And I currently live in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, but I was originally from Pikeville, North Carolina, which is a very small town. It has one stoplight, lots of fields. So I'm still getting used to city life. So the camp and the park is fantastic. It feels like home. So in college, my senior thesis was on a series of paintings that I called Larger Than Life, which dealt with expectations. Expectations from family, friends, yourself, peers, strangers, society even. Kind of thinking about how all of that kind of shapes us and our choices, kind of the idealizations that we have of what we should do, the choices we should make, how our life should be. For example, these two paintings here, they're a diptych. They're supposed to be kind of seen together. We have kind of these three cars kind of neatly going down the path they're supposed to go on. And then reaction of something has gone terribly wrong and all these cars are now piled up. Someone was going in a different direction. It's chaos and everything. So also that one on the left, in the Game of Life, if you've played it before, that is the go to college path, which during like my years growing up and even before and after, they were like, oh, go to college. You have to go to college. But that is not always the right path for everyone. But for a while, they kind of made it seemed that way, that was what you needed to do. But as you can see from the next painting beside it, it doesn't always turn out exactly how you expected. And that happens in life too. And in this series here, I wanted people to connect with these paintings, kind of draw on their own experiences as well. So for this painting here called Settle Down, you see a car kind of crashing into the church with a pink player thrown from the car. And this was based on my experiences of getting asked the question all the time, when are you getting married? When are you going to settle down? Do I hear wedding bells? And I realized when talking with my friends and peers that it wasn't just me. They were also getting asked that question and kind of feeling that constant pressure of you're not getting any younger, you need to go ahead and get stuff done. So I painted this painting to kind of get my own frustration out a little bit, but I was really surprised at how this engaged people and how connected people were with that story. But not only with the story in general, but with board games in general, with the memories people had of playing board games or their experiences with games in general. And it also had a little bit of playfulness, but also you have a real life situation, like a story that's a more serious thing. But when adding in board games and color, it gives a little more lighthearted feel, which makes everyone a little bit more kind of comfortable, and so they can engage with it more, they'll talk about it more, and hopefully kind of talk with others about it more. And I really loved the engagement that it evoked, that this whole series evoked. And I wanted to continue that in my work. Also, during that same time, I was also in a totally different kind of mind space because I did have a degree in speech and hearing sciences as well, and I was still fascinated by all the anatomical parts, like body parts, anatomy in general. So I was also doing paintings in that area too that focused more on art and science kind of working together, kind of representing it in a different way to draw attention to something that we see a lot, kind of skulls, spinal cords, you see a lot in science and art, but sometimes you see it so much that you don't really think about their function and the importance that it has. So this here is the kind of bone structures that you actually use to speak. So inside this guy here is actually where your vocal folds are. So it's a very important part, but one that doesn't normally get shown in the regular, anatomical kind of skeleton guy. The spinal cord that you normally see is actually like this line here. So I made it there, but not really important, kind of flipping it the other way around. I wanted people to look at it a different way. And so during college, there was a lot of different things going on. I had very many kind of different works. I had my board game pieces, I had my anatomy pop pieces, and I had lots of miscellaneous experiments that I did during that time too. Did not want to bore you with all of those different things. So I did not know what direction I really wanted to take my art after this. I knew I wanted to kind of draw from these two bodies of art. I really loved the engagement that I got from the board game pieces. I loved the color, and I loved having people kind of respond to the subject matter. And I wanted to change people's perspective on different things. So I knew I wanted to take that from these two and continue it into something else later after college. And right before, there's me in my college studio. So right before graduation, a couple months before, the pandemic hit, and that kind of put a wrench in whatever plans I had going on, whatever I was thinking I was going to do. So I decided just to take that time and really think about what direction I wanted to take my art professionally. So I learned a lot of new programs, digital programs, and practiced different skills, and eventually found my way to concept art and design. So concept art is kind of a visual media representing an idea. So when you see a lot in films, TVs, video games, animation, comics, the big boss people, they'll have an idea, but they won't know how to visually what that would look like. So concept artists kind of take that idea, make a visual representation of it so they can actually see what that would look like, and then we can kind of tweak it and do variations of it. Concept art, a lot of people think it is just a really nice, fully rendered, fully worked picture, a digital illustration of our painting of some sort, but realistically, concept art is a lot of drawing the same thing over and over and over again, just in slightly different angles, different perspectives, different views. So you have on the right here a creature, but you see a front view, side view, kind of an action pose, a different like side three-quarter pose. There's tons of other slightly different variations that will go into that the 3D modelers and 3D artists will then take that to create the actual character or object or space. So they can actually make that into a 3D thing. So when you see it on TV or in a movie, it looks realistic and not a more 2D kind of flat thing. And the landscape, kind of the environment on the left there, kind of the same thing. You have a kind of basic, kind of rougher look of the environment, but to quickly see the different lightings. So what would it look like if it was a blue light, kind of more, kind of moodier glow? What if it is more of a daytime scene? You kind of change the lighting really quickly. All concept art is meant to be done supposed to be really fast, because a lot of these creative pipelines are really fast turnover. Plus, this idea might not actually be the final one. They could decide, like, I don't like that at all, and you have to start all over from scratch. So you don't want to spend a lot of time on one thing. So a lot of time they don't get fully finished, fully fleshed out until you're like, this is the one we're definitely going to go with. But sometimes you do get to do fully finished illustrations, like this one here that I did of an alien planet kind of landscape here. But to get to this point, there is a lot of planning, sketching, back to planning, more sketching, and lots of painting, but digital painting, which just means you're still kind of painting, but with a kind of utensil meant for digitally instead of a paintbrush. You're just switching it out for a little digital pen. The brush marks, the brush tools, they still have texture. The brush marks and the motion you use is still very painterly, so it's not super realistic, not hyper-realism. It still has a painterly quality to it. But to get that effect also takes a while. So here you kind of can see the kind of evolution of that digital painting there. So on the side there, on the left, is one page of sketches. That's one page of tons, like very, very many. But I didn't want to do like a whole 5 slides on all the sketch pages. So the one at the very bottom on the left side there is what I decided to go with. So once you have a pretty basic kind of sketch, you will kind of block it in with normally grayscale, just so you can kind of work on the shape language, composition, and design to make sure the image itself is dynamic and all the shapes and sizes kind of work. Once you have that pretty planned out, you'll start adding in color, textures, kind of painting qualities and stuff like that, which takes a good amount of time. You normally spend, depending on how much time the studio has, either a couple weeks normally to get kind of the full finished project here. But since it was my personal one, I can kind of take as long as I need. So this, it can change. It can change from the original kind of grayscale version, but normally the big sizes don't change that often. Don't change as much. Like you can add in like cracks to the shells, you can add in doorways to add in personality and character to the place. But the bigger things, you want to have that already done and kind of planned out in general. Now, there's another one of my digital paintings that I did. I feel like this is one of my favorites, probably because of the giant mushrooms. And that there's a little bit of color in there. So I normally, in my concept art things, when I'm doing that for studios, I tend to do more of the environment projects. So when you're doing a world or a scenery, every single thing may end up getting its own concept art. Rocks. You have pages and pages of different rocks, plants, kind of trees. They all have their own kind of concept art. So there's a lot more work than you think when you see a whole new alien world in a TV show. All of those things get blended out. But I find organic and natural elements a lot more fun to paint just because it's a little more freeing. When you do buildings and cars, which I have done for concept art before, they have to be a certain way. It has to be very straight, very even, very symmetrical, because if one thing is wrong, it's very noticeable, because even if you can't quite tell what it is, you know, like that doesn't look quite right. But with organic shapes, like trees, you have roots that have like bumps and knots on it. Rocks can have jagged edges. They don't have to be the same on both sides, which give you a little bit more freedom, and I can have a little bit more fun with that. Though sometimes digital painting, you have a little bit of freedom in concept art. Sometimes you can kind of take the idea and kind of give your own spin on it, but when you're doing concept art and you have a job, it is still that idea. You can't really do your own thing that you have in your mind. Even though you think a really cool giant mushroom civilization could be awesome, they're like, no, it's supposed to be a mountain rock thing. Do not add mushrooms. Like, which makes me, I love adding mushrooms to things. Like a lot of those, like even the one before, they had little mushrooms and now I still snuck them in. Now, doing that, like concept art and having my painting classes that I was teaching, I got burned out very quickly because it wasn't really my work. I was teaching how to paint certain paintings. I was working on other people's ideas for concept art, but I didn't really have the time to experiment and work on my own more personal work that I actually kind of wanted to do. And at the time, I didn't even have time to think of what I did want to do with my work and what direction I wanted to go. So me and my husband decided to, right down below, decided to take a 3-week road trip across the country. So from coast to coast, so North Carolina all the way to California and back. And it was amazing. I had never been really past Kentucky. So I'd never seen deserts before. I had never gone anywhere out there like that. It was amazing to see all these different landscapes kind of just flowing together across. There wasn't really a big jump from one to the other. It just kind of slowly kind of transitioned to something new, which I loved. It was amazing. So all these things I'd only seen on Discovery Channel, I was actually experiencing myself. So I got to see whales breaching, even though I only got a picture like of that one. I didn't get a picture of the breach. Of course, I didn't have my phone out at the time. And feel the cool waters of the Grand Canyon here. We rafted through there, seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time and seeing how different that was to here on the Atlantic coast too. And it was really kind of rejuvenating to see and feel like that close to nature, having that kind of connection. And I knew I wanted to kind of feel that connection and excitement about wildlife and nature and kind of continue that in my work. I did grow up in a very rural town, and animals and nature were very important, not only to like our family, but the town. It was vital for the town to survive. So getting to kind of draw from that too, and kind of add in the excitement and wonder that I got from that trip. I wanted to continue that and kind of share that and hopefully get other people excited and about these animals and about conserving these kind of ecosystems. And so here is one of those pieces there. So in my work, I love taking just, the creature itself. And a lot of times to pick a creature, I like either using ones I've seen before so I can really have that kind of connection, or one that may be endangered or important to that ecosystem where they're from. So make sure I don't miss anything with these. So okay. And I want to explore paintings that have a lot of color. So I told you before, like I loved having the color, I loved having that engagement. So I wanted to celebrate these kind of animals and fauna by using bright colors to get people's attention, draw them in, and kind of show them in a different way. So normally when you see manatees, that's like they're really gray, you can hardly see them. A lot of animals are camouflaged or they're elusive and you can't really see them when you go to a certain place, even if you're specifically looking for that one animal. Or sometimes animals are just so common that you kind of forget about them. So I want to kind of draw attention to all of them in their own way, kind of make them the focal point. So you can really think about them and their importance, but also kind of erring on the side of the fantastical. Again, giving that little twist to traditional wildlife and landscape painting. So many traditional wildlife paintings, you see a beautifully done kind of portraiture of the animal, very little details of the hairs, individual hairs you can see, and they look fantastic. But I wanted to kind of give a twist, a different take on it. And sometimes I can get more animals done this way, like those tiny little hairs. Sometimes you just need to throw the paint onto the canvas. And the next one, this next guy here. So I do not care as much about being anatomically perfect with my creatures. You do want them to be somewhat accurate, otherwise they don't look like themselves. But again, I want to kind of err on the side of fantastical and just kind of let the paint do the talking. So like expressive brushwork, kind of fun textures that give the illusion of fur, but not necessarily a color or a mark that fur would have. So kind of like on the shoulders down there, this kind of just quick, square, rectangular brush marks, just to kind of give the illusion of light and shadow. And I love kind of just adding in just pops. So like the eyes, you can see like a very yellow. And Libra's eyes are probably not that yellow, but I do like to exaggerate some colors that are there, exaggerate shapes and texture, just again to kind of make it a little more fun. I feel like art should be at least a little bit of fun sometimes. Now, we have this guy here who is an elk. I created this painting based on the elk herds in North Carolina. So in the late 1700s, elks became extinct in North Carolina, not everywhere else, just North Carolina, we lost them. But in the last couple decades, we've been reintroducing them into the mountainous terrain. So instead of that species being in a frozen, fixed state, they are beginning to grow and thrive, just kind of slightly frosted now, which hence the name, kind of frosted elk. So we have a little bit of yellow kind of color coming in from that right side, kind of thawing out the elk a little bit. And then the blues I still kept because, you know, a little bit of frozen atmosphere, because it's still not for sure whether or not this reintroduction is going to be successful or not, especially because of the potential of habitat loss and human activity. So it's still kind of up in the air, which is why it's kind of half and half of blue and yellow. So I kind of use that story to help dictate the color schemes, that even though it's not a realistic color palette of elks, you can still tell that it is the elk itself. And hopefully you kind of get that kind of feeling of hope in this painting too, which is, and I hope this elk and their herds are going to be really successful. They're doing really well, so hopefully they'll be good to go. We went to see them too, and now it's even been so successful that they've kind of broken off from where they originally put them, so they're kind of making their own little herds, kind of growing and kind of moving along, which is a good sign. So we also have here a loggerhead sea turtle, which right now they are listed as threatened by the U.S. Federal Species Act, but due to the increase in kind of human activity in their nesting grounds and ongoing pollution, like fishing lures and lines being kind of in the waters and plastic, of course, they're leaning towards kind of putting them back on the endangered species list in the foreseeable future. I just wanted to kind of call attention to the vibrancy and the liveliness of the ocean and of sea turtles, and kind of the importance of that and how much life and benefit that they do bring, not only to the rest of the ocean ecosystem, but to us as well. And the fact that this liveliness, like the coral and the sea turtles, may not be here for much longer if we don't do anything about that. And I do try to keep all my colors, again, bright, colorful, fun, but the message behind it is still a more kind of serious one. Again, kind of like my Larger Than Life series. It's a fun colors, fun kind of atmosphere and engagement, but the story behind it is a more serious one. And here is Fox's Kaleidoscope. So this is probably one of my favorites. And again, like I mentioned before, I don't worry too much about anatomic perfection, but in this one particularly, certain animals, they have to have certain proportions. So if I made the ears smaller in proportion to the head or the nose bigger, it would start to look more like a wolf, kind of morph into that. And it's been very interesting to see how close these animals are when you start drawing them. A lot of times when I paint and starting a new kind of a bigger painting, I do a lot of studies beforehand. I do lots of little sketches, I do kind of color studies, and I just kind of draw the animal ahead of time to figure out what those main key points are that I need to keep in there to make them look like, in this case, a fox. So I definitely need to keep the long ears, the shorter little snout area there, and the proportion between the snout to the eyes. If you elongate it, wolf starts happening. And it did. I had to fix that. There was, I was like, oh, it's looking too much like a wolf, so you had to kind of switch it up there. I do have some digital programs that I use to kind of help with the back and forth and the sketching, just to kind of quicken up the pace a little bit. If I had to sketch out every single possible pose and color scheme that I was thinking, it would take so long, I would not have any work to show. But digitally, kind of using the skills I learned from concept art, I can quickly kind of sketch out very many different poses, compositions, pick the ones I like, add in some different colors, compare the two, and it makes things go a lot quicker, but I do have a lot more fun painting traditionally than I do digital painting sometimes. Actually feeling the paint on the canvas is very relaxing. Here is one of the little test pieces that I was talking about. So I like to call it, this one does not have a name because he's a test piece, but I like to call it eat, scream, sleep, repeat. But normally the test pieces I do don't get fully finished like this. Normally they are just really rough sketches. Sometimes most people don't even know what animal I was doodling when I do it, but I knew what they were. But this guy has so much fun doing the kind of color palette, and just possums are cool. So I just decided to continue him and finish him up completely. Eventually I will do a bigger possum. This is how much 12 by 12, which is probably about the biggest I do, a kind of a test piece. Most of my other work, the full size ones, are about 24 by 36, so a pretty good size kind of work there. But these guys are super small, but eventually we made it to a big one too. And here is another one of my bigger pieces. This guy's also kind of a 24 by 36. And he ended up getting a little more colorful than I intended. I did a lot of studies of barn owls before I painted this guy on this bigger canvas. And I had a color palette picked out. I'm like, okay, I love these colors together. This is what I wanted to do. But things don't always go to plan. And I like to leave that little bit of room when I paint. I don't want to control the creative process exactly. I want to have a little room to experiment and have fun. And if it feels like it needs to go a different direction, to let it go. So that is what this guy, even though he wasn't really a lot of fun to paint, and he just ended up having more color, which I'm fine with. Color's awesome. Now that I'm here, I'm continuing kind of those themes while I'm here at the park. So here are a couple, I think you can kind of see the little chipmunk guy right there. So I've seen quite a few little critters in my time here, which I'm super excited about because I think I mentioned before, I do like to paint animals that I have seen or had an experience with. So I've seen lots of animals at the park, which I'm super excited about. I even saw a bear, which I'm psyched. Like, yeah, it was in a car, so I was very excited. Like, yeah, but it still counts. Like, I still saw it. And I've also seen like the pileated woodpeckers. So I have lots of inspiration to kind of draw from. And the park has been beautiful. Where I'm staying 3 weeks at Misty Mount. And it's been fantastic. Lots of hiking this week. So I've been here pretty much a week now. And most of this first week has been like exploring, kind of walking the trails, kind of seeing what animals are out there. listening for their calls, trying to learn them. And then here are a couple of the sketches I've done so far. Kind of like really rough studies. You can see my little chipmunk friends. There are tons of chipmunks out there. Everywhere I turn, there's a chipmunk. So of course, that means I have to paint them. So I have those. I have skunk friends, which they did visit the cabin the first couple nights we were there. Thankfully, far enough away that they did not spray anything. We didn't smell anything, so we're thinking that's a good idea. So again, just kind of testing out different color schemes, different compositions. I'm still not exactly sure which way I'm going to go, but I do know I want to kind of look at the animals and how they affect the ecosystem that they're in, how they react and act and kind of work with the park and themselves. So I did put a little thing. If anybody has any questions and comments, or you can either ask them now, or if you're shy, like that's why you just ask me later. I'll be kind of around too. But let's see if I answer.